Hello Storytellers, my name is Maddie and I am a freelance editor and a fantasy writer, and today is the first in a 4-video series on Preptober planning and how to prepare a novel and all of the things that we can do during Preptober and October to get us ready for the writing challenge that is NaNoWriMo. So I hope that we can develop our stories and our novels together throughout this series and really hit the ground running at the beginning of November. So if you are planning a novel now or if you're getting ready to start writing a novel, please consider subscribing. Today we're going to be talking about the purpose behind Preptober and what the actual uses of it are. And then next we're going to be talking about how to develop and form ideas for novels. So if you already have a great novel idea for this NaNoWriMo, you already have an outline, a story bible, all that fun stuff, then this video might not be a whole lot of help to you. But the next video in the series is going to be 15 things that you can do to prepare and plan during Preptober. So I hope to see you there. There will be some timestamps in the description below, as well as a link to other videos and playlists for this series whenever they're live. And I'm just going to jump right into the content because I feel like a lot of people, when they hear Preptober and Preptober planning, they think writing an outline or creating scene cards or creating character cards, and a lot of people who are discovery writers or pantsers think, well, I have nothing to do during Preptober because I'm not gonna write an outline and I don't need those scene cards. I think Preptober has two equally important functions and purposes, and neither one of them are writing an outline because you don't need an outline to write a book. Now the first, and I think this is the one that people are most familiar with, is just preparing your story idea, however you come up with your story idea, your writing space, your lifestyle, and your habits for the challenge that is NaNoWriMo. I group all those in one because I feel like they all sort of interlock. You know, like every writer is different and the things that you're going to need to prepare are different. If you get easily distracted in your writing space, then something you need to do to prepare is to really clean and reorganize your stuff. If you just don't have the habit of writing anymore, then something you might need to do to prepare is to create a habit of either sitting at your desk or setting aside some time to write. Even if you're not writing during October to create that habit, you can set aside that time to read or to prepare other items for NaNoWriMo just to create the habit of being there and sitting down. Now, the things that you have to do to prepare might include creating an outline and scene cards and playlists and all that fun stuff. And if you want to prepare things and you don't really know where to go, then make sure you check out next week's video. But the second and equally as important purpose and function of Preptober is community. If you are a regular member of this community, or even if you're just new and you've been here before like Preptober started, you know that writers and authors crawl out of the woodwork during NaNoWriMo to participate in this event. We see such an uptick in, new accounts on all platforms, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter. It's really great. I love that. We see like writing groups, we see more live-ins, we see events, and I think that community aspect is just as important to the challenge as the outline and the preparing and the getting your life ready to, step up to the plate for the challenge. I think a lot of our motivation comes from finding our writing tribe, finding people who are in our age and have similar interests, or who are just writing in our genre that we really click with. And there are a few ways to go about doing this. We're not really going to cover all of them in the video, but I know the NaNoWriMo website does have like a writing group setting that I think hundreds of thousands of people really participate in NaNoWriMo just on their website alone. It is a lot harder to fall behind or even quit whenever you're part of a community where they're expecting you to share your progress and they're sharing their progress. Also, whenever you get behind or you're feeling discouraged, it's a lot easier to find motivation if you have people to go to, or if you have people who are sharing their progress with you. Having somebody say, like I fell really far behind yesterday, but I was able to, up my word count today and get back on track. That is, I think, a lot more beneficial to like motivation. It's a lot more real and tangible than just, watching people whose full-time job is writing and sharing it on YouTube, or even just telling yourself like, it's okay, I'll get caught up. Like doing it together makes it a little bit more palatable of a process whenever you hit road bumps and stuff like that. So the two real purposes and functions of Preptober are, one, to prepare your writing style and life around writing for the challenge of NaNoWriMo because it's very taxing, and then also to find community or find accountability somewhere that you are comfortable with. There are definitely different levels of sharing, like some people want to share words and other people just want to, talk throughout the process, but I think without either one of those, it would be a lot less fun to do the challenge. It would be more work. So we hear a lot of like prescribed things that you should prepare during October. We hear a lot of, do this workbook, create this idea, have this outline, have this thing ready, be ready to do this, that, and the other thing. And they're usually all writing related things that feel so much like homework. But to be honest, this month sort of came into existence out of just people being excited for NaNoWriMo before NaNoWriMo started. It wasn't part of the original NaNoWriMo event. It's something the community created because we all want to get together and get ready together, and getting ready looks different for every writer. So don't feel obligated or pressured to have an outline or to have character cards or to do all these other things that people in your writing group are. Just make sure that you are ready however it is you feel like you need to be ready to take on that challenge. And if this is the first time you're doing NaNoWriMo, then maybe ask some other people what they do to get ready and really judge, what you think would work for you. It's really trial and error, the more years you do it or the more events you take place in, the more you get a feel for what works for you. Now, one thing that almost every writer usually wants to know before they start NaNoWriMo, because you got to be writing fast to really hit that word count, one thing a lot of people usually figure out is what they want to write, and I mean this in a much more general sense. So now we're going to be talking about taking an idea and really forming and developing what could be an entire novel premise. So the traditional NaNoWriMo challenge is to write a novel that is 50,000 words or more in 1 month, but it has warped over the years, and now a lot of people just consider it to be write 50,000 words or more in a month of any project, multiple projects. Some people even do editing and other types of publishing related projects that are sort of in this genre, in this niche, which makes a lot of sense because a lot of people are at different stages in their writing and editing and publishing journey for each book they're working on. So, you don't want to throw your whole system off just to stop editing what you're working on to write for NaNoWriMo. But when I say, know what you're working on, I really mean are you writing or are you editing? Are you writing a new novel? Or are you continuing a novel you already have written? Are you writing the sequel in a series? Are you writing a collection of short stories? Are you writing romance? Are you writing fantasy? These more general things are what most people want to have an idea of whenever they're going into NaNoWriMo. So there's a good chance that if you're a writer, you probably have a little bit of this figured out already. Usually somebody has a preferred medium or an idea of what they want to work on whenever it comes to NaNoWriMo in the sense of what it actually is. For example, I like to write fantasy, so almost all the writing I do is fantasy, and I do have sometimes thriller and new adult and romance, just subplots or tones in the books, but I always write fantasy, and I know that right now I'm in a high fantasy mood, and I was torn for a while between if I wanted to work on an anthology or a novel, so that's something that I'm working on during Preptober, is just which one of those do I want to work with. So you can start this process without having a solid idea of exactly where your book's going to fall on the genre spectrum, but if you do, then that's an even better place to start because you can use that to your advantage when you're coming up with ideas. Now we're going to get serious. Here's some advice that is not necessarily bad, but I don't think it's always appropriate, that floats around the writing community when it comes to writing novels. People will say, and even professionals, that you need a big idea that's big enough that you can fill a whole novel, but it is small enough that you can write about it and experience it and have a satisfying ending in that novel. They want you to start with this premise, this general idea that is big enough for a novel. And then you take that idea and then you break it up into sections, usually the 3 acts or something of the sort. And then whenever you break it up into 3 acts and you know what's going to happen in each one, then you break it up into plot points, more specific plot points, where you fill in the gaps in between them of things that are probably going to happen along the way. So it's very popular advice, professionals and writers everywhere give that advice. And I think especially, but not only for new writers, that can be so overwhelming to expect yourself to have the premise of the novel up front. And I think that this is one of the reasons why I am a pantser and not a plotter, because if I have that general idea, I'm 10 to 20% into writing the book, and I already have a better, more solid, more unique idea of how to write the book, so that just goes out the window and I'm not following it at all anymore. And it's not intentional. It's for a few reasons, it's a lot to expect from anyone to have that information up front. In fact, there are people who have written really good and successful novels that, struggle to write the blurb afterwards because it's hard to condense all that material into a sentence or a paragraph or a thought. So why are you expecting yourself to have that ready up front? Now, it works for some people and it's definitely not wrong. So if you have that idea, and that idea keeps you on track, and that idea, gives you a foundation that you can build upon, great. But if you're one of the people who finds that to be really overwhelming, start off small. And I really do mean start off really small. I feel like most novel ideas don't start from that premise. I think that premise is where people tend to say that they formed and tend to start sharing the story. But, there was some thought and some inspiration and some brainstorming that went into the story before you get to the premise part. Usually, not always, but usually it doesn't just fall right into your head. The more you write stories, the more you'll have a better idea of what you want to write, or what is a big enough idea that's not too big. But you'll never stop having small ideas as well. And I really do mean small ideas. So your story might start from a nugget of a thought, the tone that you want it to be, the appearance of your main character, a relationship between two types of characters that you want to see play out, maybe one or two things that happen that you think is interesting that you would like to include in your story. Like, oh, if this happened, it would be so dramatic. Oh, if the culture was like this, something about the world building. Usually you get these little nuggets, like things that float around in your head from every subject, where you're like, I want to include that, and I want to include that. And if I flesh all this out and I get it all in order, I'll have the perfect outline. But that's also a really hard expectation to have on yourself, to just be able to collect all these thoughts and throw them in order, and you're only going to use those ones, or you're going to add some, or you're going to keep them in your head, or you're going to write them down. So I highly recommend starting with one or two of those points that you grab, or, if you have a bunch of them floating in your head, just start writing them down. But the next step is active brainstorming. So I always recommend to do this on paper. I find that I hear it works best on paper because there's no pressure to be exact or precise or organized. So I have this big landscape notebook, and I will write my little ideas somewhere. You can do it in the middle and do a whole brain map with lines and circles if that works best for you. You could do bullet points. You could really do whatever works for you, but write your ideas somewhere on the paper. Have active time where you're sitting down, where you're brainstorming what you can do with that idea to make it a little bit better. Ask yourself questions like, if your idea is a general trope, what is something new that I haven't read yet that I think would be interesting with this trope? Or what is a character arc dynamic that isn't really popular or I haven't seen with this trope yet? Or maybe if this is the main trope, is there a supplementary thing that would help? Or are there some subplots that I can think of that might help show this throughout the story? If your main nugget, the first thing you think about is your main character, either their tone, their attitude, their appearance, whatever, you can start brainstorming how did they get to be this way? How is this going to react with other characters around them? And when I say ask yourself all these questions, I do not mean ask yourself a question and if you don't have the answer, think about it forever. I really mean ask yourself the question, and if you can't think about the answer in a few moments of pondering it, or maybe you come up with a few ideas and you just really don't like any of them, move on and ask yourself another question. The point isn't to have everything written down. The point is to grab as many things as you can that you like. So you might start with one idea and you might ask yourself 20 questions, and out of the 20 you find 2 more things that you really like that you think you would like to include in your novel. Now you have 3 ideas. So sit down and make active brainstorming time. And the reason I keep saying active is because if you go about your day and you say, I'll think about it while I'm driving, and I'll think about it while I'm in the shower, and maybe the idea will just come to me. It might, but it also might not. And doing that is asking the process to take a lot longer than it has to. It is definitely beneficial, like in your downtime, if you can think while you do things. Think, plan, be efficient, but there is nothing I feel that is replaceable for actually taking some time and sitting with some paper, with music on, or the TV, or maybe you're just sitting with your family and everyone's relaxing, and actually brainstorming and writing out ideas you like, ideas you don't like. You don't have to use all of them. Now, at this stage, you might want to decide if you're going to have an outline or not. If you want an outline and you have an idea of what you want your story to look like at this point, after you do maybe 1 or several sessions of brainstorming, for me, honestly, sometimes it takes 5 to 8 of just brainstorming random little nuggets and ideas until I start organizing them in a coherent sort of good for storytelling order. Maybe if you want an outline, this would be a good place to start putting things in order. You don't have to keep everything. They don't have to be major plot points. They can be super non-committal little points that you just happen to pass throughout the story. It could be like backstory that you want to sneak in, but start just organizing them in order. And, as you do that, you're going to start to get more ideas of, what comes before and after what points. You'll get some ideas of which points like have space in between them that need to be filled in. Now, if you don't want to write an outline, just the same, you can organize these however you think is beneficial for writing. You can try to organize them in like chronological order, like a timeline, just loosely to see like these are things that I think should happen. Or you can organize them by what type of information it is. You can organize all of your stuff about characters together. You can organize all of your stuff about world building together. You can organize all of your stuff about like settings and locations and stuff like that together. Whatever is most beneficial for you to reference later on. Sometimes creating this list really just gives you an idea of the tone you want to set for the story. And you might unlock that longer premise-like idea whenever you do it. You might brainstorm, and like as you're doing this, you might want to keep like a little section at the bottom blank where you're brainstorming, and maybe as you're thinking about things and you're collecting these little nuggets and asking yourself questions, maybe you'll start coming up with ideas and premises. The more ideas you get and the more ideas you think about and question and try to improve, the more comfortable you're going to be with creating ideas for stories, the more comfortable you're going to be with being unique and creative and really like turning common tropes on their heads a little bit, because your brain will always pick the easiest route first. A lot of the times, and not always, but as an editor I can say very often, your brain will give you an idea that's not necessarily good. It might be too easy. It might be, like done too many times before. It might just not make sense. Your readers will be intelligent and they'll be able to tell a cop-out like solution. If you're writing for fun, you want to write whatever you want and you don't want to share it with anybody, then, do whatever you want and don't heed this advice at all. But if you're writing to develop good storytelling habits, or because you would like to publish in the future, know that your brain is not always going to like give you the best ideas first. That's why editing exists. Usually book writers will write their book and self-edit several times before they even seek professional editing help. Some of the most famous books right now did not end up the way they started out. For example, Sarah J. Maas's Court of Thorns and Roses, one of the most popular books in fantasy right now that was originally YA, has moved into adult. There are a lot of relationships in that book, and I'm not going to give any spoilers when I say this, just that some of the more important relationships in the series now that is successful and popular didn't actually start that way, and they were not intended to be that way in the original. There are original review copies, and I was reading about this and it really blew my mind, where like some people got together that I really couldn't even think about how that would work out. Because at the time it was the easiest solution, but it wasn't necessarily the best storytelling tactic, which is why I recommend scrap paper, and it's why I recommend brainstorming and getting all these nuggets down, because you're going to have things that you think about that you like, that might be interesting, and if you keep thinking about them and you keep thinking about the points and items around them, or maybe you think about how it's going to affect the readers or the tone or how it's going to affect your theme, you might be able to find a similar but better solution to that one like instance or that one idea. And the most important thing to remember through this whole process of idea creating and changing and moving things around and really coming up with what you think that one premise might be is that it doesn't have to be set in stone. Even if you have a full outline and you have a full plan, even if this is book 1 and 3 books that you've already planned out, you can change the plan. It happens often if you come up with a better idea. Sometimes even just the wording will change if the story doesn't, to represent the way the story turned out a little bit better. So a quote that I heard, and I'm going to be paraphrasing because I don't remember the exact wording, but it was something along the lines of, the plot is just the characters' footprints in the snow on their way to the journey. You don't see all of the emotional turmoil. You don't see all the tension and the pacing whenever you're looking at and you're writing and you're experimenting with the plot. So sometimes you will create a premise, an idea, using those plot points that you have devised, and halfway through your book you realize that you might be on the plan exactly perfectly with no changes, but the emotional reaction your characters are having to each other and the speed that your book is moving might actually make a totally different premise make more sense with the same plot points. So never give up on developing an idea and never give up on self-editing and improvement, because ideas that you don't use now can just be recycled later. So if you find something you love and you're like, doesn't fit in the story, or I found something better, save that. Save it in a Word document, save it in a notebook. You can always come back to it. You can utilize it in a different story. And the more you practice doing this, the easier it'll be to come up with more whole ideas quicker. So you might need to start with tidbits. Maybe if you even have just writer's block, like you're great at coming up with ideas all the time, but you're getting out of writer's block and you're a little bit stumped, like maybe this would be a good way to build your creativity back up. So if this video helped you with your novel planning at all, remember to give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing, because the next video is going to be on 15 things you can prepare during Preptober to help you get ready for the NaNoWriMo novel writing experience.